What if a greater understanding of how your brain works could help you navigate the hardest moments of your career? Today, I'm talking with Dr. Spyros Papapetropoulos. He's a neuroscientist who spent over 20 years developing medications for the brain, working on Parkinson's disease, anxiety, PTSD at companies like Pfizer, Allergan, Biogen, and Acadia. He's currently CEO of Phragma Therapeutics, and his new book, Mind Odyssey, just came out. It's about training your brain for purpose, balance, and fulfillment at career crossroads. My name's Andrew Sterling, your host, and this is Talent Take 5. Spyros, thanks for making the time. I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Andrew, thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation too.
So you've had an extraordinary career spanning clinical neurology, neuroscience research, and executive leadership. So for those that aren't familiar with you, can you tell us a little bit about your story and your background?
Absolutely. It's relatively uncomfortable talking about yourself, but doing it in a context that may help others, I find it gratifying. So looking back at my career, I had the curiosity and the privilege of exposure. I was exposed to medicine, treating patients. I was exposed to science. Human genetics can do to families carrying mutations, disease causing mutations, and then business from very different angles. Business from a multi-billion dollar corporation standpoint, the big pharma, big biotech, but also as an entrepreneur. So these different angles are key have been key in my career. But what really struck me over time, and that's the main theme of the book, key in understanding professional success, is that, ultimately our failure or success is rarely related to either intelligence or luck or opportunity. It's
For
how
sure.
people navigate uncertainty and pressure and career transitions. And when I realized this framework, and I did realize it almost subconsciously by practicing, I came up with this purpose, balance, fulfillment track that if you train your brain to follow, you may maximize your professional potential. So
Mm,
writing this book was really about making this framework more explicit, ensuring that it's put in plain languages, and it has a lot of autobiographical features from all the lenses that I was exposed to. Understanding of the brain, understanding of business, understanding of science, but most importantly, the focus is how the brain actually drives our professional decisions and how we can maximize quality decisions throughout our career without jeopardizing our mental health.
it's a great place for us to start and maybe for us to dive into what led you to write the book now, right? You've got this interesting duality and different lenses of looking at a career and the successes you've had. You've been a brain scientist, but then also this executive. So what led you to think about, I need to write a book that captures some of the neuroscience behind driving career trajectory and decision making in your professional journey?
Yeah. First of all, what I didn't want to do is write a book that is heavy on science. I deliberately left out any reference to any scientific paper, document, and I've written my career about 200 of these. I wanted to distill down the science to something that is digestible for the reader. At the time, it felt like a life decision. It was a dream of mine. I wanted to write a book. I wanted to elaborate and share some of the experiences that I lived through. And I've lived through a lot of issues in my professional career and put some neuroscience perspective that is digestible. Make the book really not as, this is not an autobiographical book. It has a lot of autobiographical features, but it's really a negotiation between emotion reward and long-term reasoning. Okay. I can tell you when I was a youngster, I was driven more by my passion, by my limbic system. I was intrigued by professional athletes like many young individuals, but my reasoning part of my brain, my prefrontal cortex, was already evaluating risks, probabilities of success, and meaningfulness in pursuing a purely sports focused career. And that in a very young age, in ultimately, that's what tipped the balance. And it was not logic. It was this emotional reasoning around what gives me the ultimate pleasure. I had the privilege of living in a family of physicians. Both my father and my mother and other members of my family are in the medical field. So I was exposed to this ultimate purpose of theirs in helping people. And I saw how much joy they were able to draw from following that purpose. So this is kind of like a framework that helped me very early on follow purpose instead of, let's say, my dreams, my guts, my passions, which are great and tools. And I've done it and I've followed my passions and I followed my hobbies. But I learned to follow the deepest meaning, the more altruistic path, which is connected to purpose.
It's interesting. I'm glad you brought this up because I know in your book's intro you talked about this sort of crossroads moment as you're a tennis guy, if I'm not mistaken. If looking back now, what you didn't understand then about the brain science of that decision making that got you to decide that. So you talked a little bit about the limbic system, the prefrontal cortex. For folks that might not be as well versed in some of these things, now that you have the expertise through your professional career, looking back, like what was actually going on during that decision making process that you didn't necessarily understand then as an adolescent, essentially?
Well, the decision making process is super, super complex. And what drove me was not brain science, definitely, at that age. And it was definitely not the ultimate sense of purpose. Okay. What was driving me was curiosity, which is a super important component in everyone's career. If you stop being curious, you turn to a machine and ultimately you compromise your professional life and your professional career. So curiosity was one of the things that always guided me. So I always was curious about other things. I mean, I loved language, I love science, I love the business perspective of a professional life. So and I was curious and I was always exploring. The other thing that subconsciously helped me was being open to feedback.
Mm, yep.
Ultimately, as I'm looking back, even my coach didn't really believe that I was going to be a top tennis player, let alone a professional world ranked player. He didn't kill my dreams. He supported me. But, looking back, I was a recipient of behaviors from my environment that suddenly told me, try something else. Why don't you try track and field? Why don't you focus on, what is your career trajectory? And this came sadly from my coach. I saw how he treated the real champions, the people that he really believed that they could make it big. And although I was good, I was in the top 5 in my club in city in Greece, which is not, Greece has generated a couple of tennis players. Tsitsipas is one of them. Found it very rewarding to get out and play, but I was curious. I wanted to do more. But, the real hard love came from my parents and said, look, you're not going to be a professional tennis player. Why don't you think about something else? So I was, instead of being defensive, I took in this information, processed it, and ultimately I made the right decision to do something else with my life. I still play tennis.
I was going to ask if you still played.
I still play tennis. I broke my foot playing tennis last week, and that was the sweetest
My
injury I've ever
God,
had in my life.
my God, I'm sorry. What are the odds that just happened? But I'm sure when you're in good form that you still give people a run for the money, even if you decided that wasn't going to be like the professional
Absolutely.
trajectory.
I've never stopped. I mean, I stopped for a period of time for about a decade. I stopped because, you have to focus on your studies. You have to focus on your early medical training. You have to focus on an early family and small children. But after I was out of this craziness, as a young physician starting a family, I was able to pick up the racket, and that was around 34 years. I was 34, and fast forward my mid 50s now. I've always played, always drawn a lot of comfort and a lot of energy from sports. And people can draw the same energy from hobbies, okay? Music, theater, cinema, traveling, hiking, essential elements to achieve this balance, because unfortunately our brain doesn't separate from professional life from personal life. So, in order to be truly balanced, I only talk about professional balance, and that's by default. I didn't want to have this book be a practical psychology book. This is not the book. If you're looking for practical psychology tips, this is not the book you should be reading. This is a book about how to train your brain with practical tips and how to apply this training in your professional career to make sure that you have the clarity of thinking to navigate the most tough instances in your professional life. And tough instances can be great successful moments. You want to ride your wave of success in a very, very specific way. How to navigate the lows, how to avoid the extreme highs, and how to avoid the extreme lows in your professional career. And of course, if you do this and if you train your brain, some of these concepts are going to follow you in your personal life.
So as you're talking, one of the things that I'm thinking about is I think people navigate like the ideal picture they have in their head for what they should do in their life. That could be with hobbies and creative interests. I was a kid skating around my driveway pretending I was going to be in the NHL. Right, in the same way you probably were throwing up a serve. Acting like you're you gonna be
In
competing
Wimbledon
for an
or
Olympic
in the
gold.
French Open.
Right, exactly. So how do you, now with your experience having made so many different transitions, like, would you encourage people to think about their dreams and as they think about their future potential self? Because I think there's an importance to, sort of thinking about the success that you want to have as you've made multiple pivots, even from away from something that was more of a hobby to, the clinical neurology side, to like drug development, to then being an executive, which all require really different skills. But then also when you were starting, the path forward is much different in each of those, and you have to still think about the end place you want to go. So I'm just kind of curious how you'd encourage people to think about like the beginning part of the journey, because I'm sure dreams still are a part of that. Maybe you start your first job out of school. You're thinking about how can I maximize my success in this new role, right? That's a dream. So what's your reaction to that, and that thinking?
Don't get me wrong. I advise people not to religiously follow their dreams, religiously follow their passions, but they're so important in framing who we are as people. So these are the greatest tools. So you should work on your dreams. You should work on your passions. You should follow your instinct when there's a bear chasing you, not when you have to make a very important decision. That's where you you follow your logic, not your instinct. So these are great tools. The same applies for more materialistic things like money or
Hmm.
fast cars, or I mean, I like the concept of being financially independent. I like the
I
concept
like
of
those things
driving a
too. I
nice
like
car.
fast cars and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do. Even pretending that I do. But what has driven me is not, honestly, it's not this idea. I want to get a raise. I want to get more money. I want to have a bigger bank account. I want to buy the bigger car, because that never ends. The car comes with a supercar. The supercar is a small airplane. The small airplane is a bigger airplane. Then you want the biggest yacht, and never ends. It never ends. It's a vicious cycle that is driven by the wrong circuits in the brain. And these circuits, unfortunately, they adjust and adapt. They're driven by dopamine, they're driven just by reward. And we've all lived through this. We've all lived through a raise. We were raving about the raise, the first raise that we got. And, it ended up that we adjusted. And 3 months later, we were thinking about how to get our next raise and when is this going to come. And the same applies for promotions. So what I subconsciously did, and I formed my purpose in my early 20s, I believe, is I think what drives me beyond these things, what drives me in an altruistic manner. And that's how I developed my own purpose, and I worked on it, and my purpose has evolved, which is helping people. All right. And then you asked about this transitions of mine. Indeed, I've made a lot of transitions, some good, some bad. It was never a single moment. So if you look at all these transitions, there was never misalignment between what I was doing and how could I best express my purpose. Okay, so as a physician, I was helping individuals, one patient at a time. As an academic physician, I was helping individuals through an academic practice, through an academic research practice, and through teaching, because I was teaching future generation of doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals, speech therapists, whoever took my neuroscience classes in order to become valuable contributors to helping other people. And then, I was intrigued by science. I've always have, and I was very curious about drug development. Very early on, as an academic neurologist at the University of Miami, I found myself being involved in more clinical trials by choice. I wanted to scale helping people. So this scaling came through my involvement as a medical director in the beginning, designing trials that my colleagues would run side by side with companies. And that introduced the first scale. And then as an entrepreneur, you pull everything together, all your experiences, and you build systems that enable everything. You take the scale at a different level. So I started from an individual physician caring for one patient at a time, transitioned into teaching and training other individuals while helping one patient at a time, and then scaling through my early pharma career. And then as an entrepreneur, hopefully reaching more people, not only through the drug making process. And I've been fortunate enough to having worked on at least 5 drugs that are now out there in pharmacy shelves, but also having a healthy working environment and ensuring that the people that I call colleagues are heard, and they're understood, and they feel that are equal contributors to the shared vision or purpose that I have.
So I love this idea of purpose. The next piece is this balance, because I feel that as you've gained more and more responsibility, right? You've started to lead teams. The scope of what you have responsibility for increases as you scale your career, you scale your purpose. So let's dig into the balance piece. Like, how do you define that? What does that look like?
Well, balance is a result of your ability to regulate emotions and make clear decisions under pressure that you're probably not going to regret one way or another. So that is what I call balance. So purpose is, why am I doing something? Balance is, how do I live my life, and how do I position myself internally and towards others? So that is the balance. And if you follow a certain recipe that I'm elaborating in my book, you can train your brain again to avoid this highs and lows of your professional career and make your professional life more smooth sailing, independent of what's going on around you. I mean, you're going to have difficulties no matter what. You're going to have challenges. You're going to have failures. you're going to have to face sickness as an individual. Every person is a patient or becomes a patient. None of us are immune. So you're going to face family issues, hardship in work environments that may be your fault, may be other people's fault. So if you're level headed and you stay grounded, following your calling or your real purpose in life, you can achieve a certain level of balance that will help you navigate even the worst of the worst situations. So that is the concept. And it's all explained by neuroscience and networks in our brain and how they communicate with each other. A perfect example is, our anxiety is driven by a very, very small area in the brain called the amygdala. And
Mm. Yep.
the connections of the amygdala with different areas of the brain. The amygdala per se is responsible for what we call fight or flight. It's a very primitive response. Other mammals have the same type of response when they're in danger. They have to figure out whether they are going to stay in place and fight or their opponent is too superior. So they better run for their lives. So run for their life versus stay and fight. So when this gets perturbed, it creates this system and its connectivities creates situations where, you're constantly in higher anxiety levels. And what this does, it distracts your brain from being able to perform a normal task that requires thought process. So basically your brain is utilizing its power to fuel the anxiety development and to feed it, and it doesn't allow the other parts of the brain, the logic and the problem solving, joy, to develop. So you have to be able to fight this anxiety. Okay, the same applies with dopamine. You're flooded with dopamine, you want to get rewarded, and that's all you think about. It's, my reward, my reward, my reward. But unfortunately, you want more reward and more reward as time goes by. And this doesn't let your brain achieve this balance between endorphins, serotonin, oxytocin, that are other neurotransmitters that give you this euphoria, this joy, let you have good mood, and the balance is tipped. So you're heavily reliant or independent on, let's say, dopamine and glutamate, and the other neurotransmitters are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So it's a chemical imbalance, and you can train all this. You can train the system and you can introduce balance, neurotransmitter balance, that will allow you to navigate your life. I want to make a very, very important distinction here. I'm talking about healthy individuals. Different rules applies if you have an underlying psychiatric condition.
Right.
And if you do, seek help. I understand there's a lot of stigma, especially in the workplace, but I've been an evangelist of speaking up. I've had my fair share of anxiety. I've never been diagnosed with depression, but definitely I've went through some moments of what felt like depression looking back. But, I didn't speak up as much as I should have, but do speak up. We live in a different age. There's no real stigma. People understand. There's a mechanism for help. Some of this may help overall, the things that are discussed in the book. But if you really have a problem, seek help, professional help, talk to a therapist, talk to a psychiatrist, and try to resolve it. Because the thing with mental health and psychiatric disease is, if you let it untreated, it will get worse, unfortunately. So do it proactively, take care of your mental health as much as possible. And since we live 2/3 of our lives in a professional setting, that's where, help should be also focused, not just outside in the community. So
Great point.
This is a few things that I wanted to share.
You mentioned, so for the training piece, training your brain, you talked about the amygdala firing. Are there things that, if people are at work and are there common threads that happen when that's firing so people can recognize it so that they can maybe objectively look at how they react to get at better outcomes, right, at work? Because I think there's some parallels, right, with some of the patient outcomes you want to get with work outcomes, and looking at sort of how this stuff fires. But how do you train yourself to maybe have better management of that fight or flight response that you talked about?
Thinking through your decisions. Unfortunately, if you look at how success is defined, look at a successful CEO or a successful entrepreneur or a successful politician. They are typically rewarded by their fast decision making, thinking on their feet. Okay. And that's what we're taught. It doesn't work that way. Decisions and big moments need a thought process. Of course, at some point you need to decide. You cannot postpone forever. You cannot be too analytical. That works against you because then you cannot move the needle. Okay. So when you're facing with a situation, take a step back. The practical examples that I give is sit up and take a short walk, talk to a colleague, try to kind of break the routine and think things through. Don't act on impulse, because remember, that's exactly what you shouldn't be doing. If you're acting on impulse in a high stress situation, your anxiety circuit is taking over. Unfortunately, the logical brain, your front part of the brain, which separates us from other mammals and makes us human, does not have a chance to kick in and guide the process. So rule number one, take a step back. Okay. I'm not saying that it's sometimes you have to be decisive. It's very situational, but whenever you can, you take a step back. I've recently had a situation in my professional life, a very hard decision that I had to make. I had to engage in very difficult conversations as part of a group for 3 times. And every time I would step back and reassess. Instead of engaging in conflict, I deliberately walked away after having seen how the conflict evolved and analyzed things. But it was the final conversation which I didn't feel aligned with my purpose. So whatever the discussion was going, it was against my pure purpose and my principles. So at that time, I let myself act on impulse because I've done all the pre-work to allow to have a decision. But this happened after 4 sessions and 4 discussions. So take a step back, create the space that you need for healthy thinking, ask for other people's opinions, be aware, self-aware. So you have to make sure that your antennas are high and there's no disconnect between how you perceive yourself and how others perceive you. So when you kind of align these two, you're going to be open to feedback. You're going to be open to criticism, and you're going to be better as a human, and you can achieve even further balance. So I know it's a lot, but step one, just step back, get into the process of thinking through the issues, ask for help. And when you re-engage, again, do this you may need 2 or 3 cycles in order to solve something. If you need to solve something imminently, again, take 2 minutes. Don't write this aggressive, inflammatory email and hit the set button. Write it, save it, and come back to it 5 minutes later. Time yourself with discipline. 5 minutes later. Revise it. Okay? If you don't have to send it, save it again and come back to it next day. 90 times out of 100, you're not going to send the email. You're going to send
I'm really
something
glad you said
completely
that.
different.
I'm like, that was my initial. I'm like, this seems. So is there a You see this with your work with the amygdala, that there is a time factor. Once it's been triggered, it's like you need to give it time because, if you thought there was a threat to you over time, and then eventually nothing happened, and then I feel safe again. So it's like when that's triggering, don't immediately respond, because I think that happens a lot. You might have something triggering at work that's a negative situation, and it's tempting to your point, fire off an email, but time is the best medicine, it seems like.
It's so funny that you mentioned this. So medicine has evolved. Okay. So there is a form of brain scan called functional MRI. And what this functional MRI does, it measures the activity of certain brain regions in different situations. Okay. So the activity of the amygdala is so much increased in anxious people, in people that have generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, in people that are facing anxious situations. So if I have you in the MRI machine and I show you a picture of a frightening picture, your amygdala will start, will light up. So these concepts are not real concepts. We can actually image them, we can see them in a brain scan, and we can control them. If you take, let's say, an anxiolytic, an anti-anxiety medication, you can see after an hour and a half, your amygdala stop lighting up as much. The same applies in your everyday life. I would say a minimum amount of time that you need to wait is an hour and a half for your system to reset after you've experienced an anxiety-inducing event.
Interesting. On the other side of it, I was curious to get your reaction to dopamine. I've taken an interest in the idea of dopamine fasting. Is that something that would be worthwhile for folks that are maybe so reward oriented in their position where you're not always going to get rewarded? And so is there some recommendations you would have as far as maybe managing your need for dopamine as a motivator for people that are in their roles? And I know that there's a crossover and intersection with the dopamine response, through food and entertainment and social media and things of that sort that people are interacting with throughout the course of their 2/3 of their life, that they're doing work, professional work. But how should people think about their dopamine, their behavior as it relates to their dopamine reactions?
Yeah. So dopamine regulates reward, motivation, mood, but it also regulates motor control. And, the areas in the brain that are involved are so close. We're talking about, these areas are like some sort of a big bean in size, and they are so packed with dopamine neurons that have different projections everywhere that is mind blowing. So dopamine is super essential for everything we do. And there is a certain tone. Okay. So these neurotransmitters are released by nerve terminals, neural terminals with like in a tonal fashion. And there are ways to increase your, so if you feel rewarded, you actually release more. But then on the other flip side of the neuron, there are receptors. Dopamine acts on something. Okay. So it's released on one end, it's taken up by what we call a receptor that senses the dopamine levels in the brain. And then you have the ultimate expression in our behavior, motor behavior, cognitive behavior, you name it. So, not all the people have the same baseline tonal release of dopamine. And, if you're a risk taker, a adrenaline seeker, adrenaline is another very interesting neurotransmitter. But if you're seeking this reward, okay, what you do is you increase the tone. So you increase the baseline levels of how dopamine is released, and the receptors get somewhat desensitized. So you need more and more and more and more and more. So you have to rewire your brain away from just the rewards to altruism. So thinking about other people, thinking about your colleague, thinking about what you enjoy, not as an individual per se, but what you enjoy contributing to others. So that's one recipe for lowering your dopamine levels.
I love the title of the book and drawing upon especially your Greek roots, right, with the Odyssey and Odysseus's journey as sort of a metaphor with his knowing his purpose and maintaining balance and be really interesting if he had some more awareness of his amygdala response, how he might navigated things differently in that. But I love to dig into knowing purpose and maintaining balance through setbacks and steering towards fulfillment, right? Because I think this is kind of the big picture of what we're after in our careers and kind of balancing and understanding how our brain's working. But at the end of the day, it's that third piece of this equation that I'd like to chat about is this idea of fulfillment. And for the modern professional navigating very high pressure fields, which you've seen firsthand, how do you identify your own Ithaca and what that looks like on the fulfillment end?
You have to work on identifying your purpose. Unfortunately, there's no bypassing this, and you have to ask yourself questions. Questions like, what do I care about beyond money and cars and status? What kind of impact matters to me? You know, Getting out in there in the community, it's not about driving up to a party with a fast car, but what really matters to me when it comes to the community around me? And what would I still do? Would I still do this if, there was no imminent reward? There was no monetary reward or there was no promotion. So, that's how you find your Ithaca. Ithaca is not, it happens that my grandmother is from the island of Ithaca, and I've been many, many, many times there. It feels like a holy place. So, if it's not a destination, it's a compass. It's a direction that you're taking. The destination will give you some reward, but it's the journey. And that's taken from the Odyssey, of course. And what matters is the journey. So if you look at what Odysseus did, and there's a movie with Matt Damon coming out called The Odyssey, I think people, once they see and absorb the movie, which I'm sure it's going to be a blockbuster, they're going to be able to digest the book a little better. uh, it you know uh, Odysseus went through all these different ups and downs. He got better with time, but he did lose his direction and he lost his crew. He lost his faith many times, but he was always able to bounce back. And even when he went back to Ithaca, he reached Ithaca, he still had work to do. His wife was being courted by other people. His son was in a problem state. So his issues were not over. Okay. But he had this compass that I'm going to go there and it's the journey that matters. And I'm going to keep on doing what I'm doing in a way because, I feel now fulfilled and I can continue doing what I'm doing no matter what's going on around me, because it brings me this internal joy. So I hope that I'm answering your question. So Ithaca is not a destination, it's a direction, it's a journey, and it's lifelong work.
I love what you said about it. It is the journey, and I think that a lot of professionals are likely saying that they should be somewhere and they're not there yet, right? Like there's always this sort of the gap and the gain kind of difference. But I also feel like people end up feeling stuck a lot. And I think what's really interesting about this look at the neuroscience and decision making, risk taking, and finding your balance, your purpose, your balance, your fulfillment. But in these moments where people feel stuck, I think one of the things that we see a lot, I talk with folks a lot, especially since the COVID pandemic, I think really uncovered a lot of this and accelerated it, and people being aware of the idea of burnout. What's your take on folks that might be feeling a sense of burnout in their roles, and how do you manage through some of that? Because I'm sure that you have some thoughts on that piece of it, because I suspect that burnout plays a huge role in people deciding that, they may take a call from a recruiter They might apply to a new job just to see because they don't know how to manage through those reactions. But does that mean that they've lost their purpose if they're feeling burnt out?
Not necessarily. So I just want to frame what the burnout is, okay? Because burnout comes in different flavors, but again, it's driven by areas of the brain. Amygdala overactivation, your prefrontal cortex is not working as well as it should because the amygdala is taking over, so you're making poor decisions, and you have chronic cortisol elevation. So your system is haywire. You're essentially stuck in a minor form of fight or flight. You cannot concentrate. Probably you're going to have issues with sleeping. And it's another vicious cycle of events that, if not dealt with, it's only going to get better. So if you're wondering, am I burned out? I think you should really look for emotional volatility. So if your emotions are all over the place, you get angry, you get sad, you shout to your family or colleagues, you have fogginess, you have reduced clarity, fatigue, and also you want to kind of remove yourself. This is typically called avoidance. These are very, very common things to look for in high performance. So high performance performers don't actually collapse. They deteriorate gradually. So you look for these signs: emotional volatility, reduced clarity, disengagement, trouble in concentration. Look for signs and signals from the outside too. Just ask. Okay, so you need to be aware that these are happening and confirm these things with the outside environment. So how do you, stress is good, but in very short bursts. Chronic stress, it's going to lead to burnout. It's going to be harmful. And how do you deal with all this? And again, not from a medical perspective. So these are hacks for busy professionals. You have to have breaks. You have to take your time. One thing you can do is start working in 90 minutes cycles. This is very helpful. And then step away, do something else for a period of time, and then go back to work. The other thing is you need to slow down. Okay. Slowing down is a very interesting concept, and you don't need a lot of time to slow down. You need intentional time to slow down. 10 or 15 minutes may be enough, but it has to be intentional. You have to think through, now I'm slowing down. I'm doing this to help myself recover. I'm obviously going through something. And this is the brain training that I'm talking about in the book. These small hacks: go for a walk. We talked about the walk, combining light exercise with mental clarity is essential. Combine a gap and a break with a pleasant conversation, because, humans feed out of humans, is also important. Recovery has a lot of flavors, but it comes from realization that you might be suffering. You have to look for these signs, and you have to take action. Otherwise, you're going to be stepping in a landmine. Unfortunately, there's no doubt about it.
Would you say this is true with this new term that's been around for, I'd say, the last year or so, on LinkedIn and things like that? This idea of quiet cracking, where it's high performers who on the surface appear fine, but under the surface are really one step away from, kind of a breakdown, right? And kind of people hanging on by a thread. Would you say some of these things are true in that sense, where people are, I think a lot of times people are burned down and they stop performing, but I think this is kind of the other side of it, where people are performing, but under the surface there's some stuff going on. Is it similar?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think I mentioned that high performance do not collapse. They suffer and deteriorate gradually, especially the ambitious ones. So having, awareness is key here. Stepping back and being able to recognize what is happening is half of the solution. Okay. Otherwise, you're again looking for trouble. You cannot make the right decision under stress. Your logic is going to be overridden. Your arguments are going to become weaker. And you're going to lose confidence to your ability to perform. But also, if you're a leader, the people around you may lose confidence as well. You don't have many power cards, unfortunately. In this day and age, you can have a misstep once or twice, but the third time is not a charm. You're going to have to suffer the consequences. So you have to prevent it, take the necessary steps, and build emotional strength by, again, going back to what's important to you and taking the time to think over things over without the noise of stress, anxiety, and pressure introduced by work.
I'm really glad you brought up the leadership piece. I think it's an area I wanted to talk about. I think it's really important to be able to regulate some of this, increase your own awareness of how your brain is working as you're in these situations, right? Maybe if you are in that quiet cracking camp, or if you are dealing with, high stress, anxiety as it relates to your performance at work and things of that sort. The leadership aspect of this is interesting to me, and I'd love to get your thoughts on what leaders should be thinking about to really optimize their team's cognitive performance, the workflow, because it's one thing to work on it yourself. It's another to lead a group of people through to maximize your effectiveness in a broader sense in a team setting. So what's your advice to leaders to get a better handle on this approach to managing their team?
When you look at a colleague, okay, or a team member, most people identify a skill set, okay? This is not the right thinking. Every colleague, every person is unique and complex, far beyond their apparent skills. We share the same neural systems and we operate with, very ssimilar mechanisms. You have to realize that the fact that you're a leader or a supervisor or have some sort of authority doesn't make you any different. And you cannot treat people just as a dry set of skills. You have to create an environment where there is psychological safety.
Yep.
People, remember, they shouldn't be threatened. If they're threatened, they go back into their anxiety mode and their thinking deteriorates, their ability to collaborate and make the right decisions and produce the right work is compromised. So you have to treat people bag of skills, but as colleagues that share very similar biology with you, and you have to tap into their brain in the right way with collaborative approaches and a mindful human touch. No one wants to work for a boss, but everyone wants to work with a friend. Okay? And the midway, but we don't have to be all friends. We can be all friends, but we can be colleagues. But this has to be genuine. Unfortunately, people smell nonsense,
Mhm.
and they shut down. So this is kind of, and you have to treat. We talk a lot about precision medicine, precision management. You have to manage everyone differently. You have to understand what's in it for them, how their brain works, what's their motivation, and everyone needs a little bit of a different leadership approach. Managers out there, I understand this sounds exhausting, okay? But it becomes a lot easier if you train your brain to look at individuals the right way. And this is a secret for professional success. Your business is going to thrive. Businesses never thrive on fear. Okay. There are examples and there are exceptions to everything. There are some businesses that have been led by very toxic leaders that have been successful, but these are not examples. They're exceptions. Okay. So we like tend to focus on case studies where, this one company and this person is very authoritative and look what he's achieved and he's X, Y, and Z. But there are 100 companies that have failed for the same reason. And we stick to the one that have succeeded. Okay. So resilient teams stay connected, share the same vision. I know that a lot of us, even when I was younger in my career, I thought that vision and missions in companies are just fluff and they don't matter. They do matter. They do matter. If you live the purpose and live the vision, it does matter. There is a trust and there is a psychological peace and calms employees, and you can get the best out of everyone, including yourself and others. So you have to basically treat people as people, make sure that everyone understands the common vision and the common purpose, what every company is working on, and then act as a precision manager, adapting to everyone's needs, as opposed to a kind of to a blanket approach.
Such good advice. And I love that you talked about the psychological safety piece. It's like we as leaders should be thinking about, we don't want people having an amygdala response that clouds their decision making and ability to do their best work. So there is beyond this sort of fluffiness of like, oh, psychological safety. There is some solid science. It sounds like behind that, which is great. I was curious, just a couple of like some lightning round questions to get your take on. There's a huge push, I think, now with cognitive enhancement, supplementation, the use of nootropics, peptides, for folks to maximize their own mind body connection performance as it relates to work and life. Are there things that you feel like really are worth people considering, things that maybe you have found effective for yourself? Because there's a lot, and I know there's a lot of money from companies that want to, encourage you to buy their nootropic or things like that. But I'm curious if there are things that do work that you would encourage people to consider as they're thinking about maximizing their cognitive performance by use of therapeutics or supplementation.
Well, I start with a foundation. So supplements and uh, externally and pharmaceuticals are definitely helpful. I mean, I am in the business of therapeutics. Okay. So I develop drugs for a living to treat disease. Okay. And, the boundaries between health and disease are muddy. Okay. I mean, what you're describing is, how do you enhance a cognitively intact person? How do you prevent breakdowns? And how do you treat someone that is actually um, in an obvious state of distress? Okay. Not there yet with psychiatric disease, but definitely high level, high functioning anxiety related and triggered by a work environment. I always start with the foundation. The foundation is sleep, nutrition, exercise, and stress control, taking a step back. So there's nothing like working on these elements before, looking for, therapeutics or supplements. Okay. Sleep. You have to dedicate and commit to your own sleep cycle, and you have to get enough of it. Otherwise, you're compromising your ability to problem solve. Okay. I'm not going to talk about the benefits of exercise. Everyone knows that.
Yeah, well,
Um,
we all know we need to work
everyone, I
out more.
mean, there's no best feeling, and that's endorphin driven actually. It's like eating chocolate, but there's no better feeling like from like when you finish a workout, taking a relaxing shower, that feeling when it's all said and done, it's euphoric and it's just, and you can never get enough of it. So it's very interesting. It's not like dopamine that you get used to it. You don't get used to it. It never runs out. So I go back to the first. If you need to enhance any of these, so let's say sleep, exercise, stress control, you can supplement. You can supplement whatever works for you. I mean, I take my occasional melatonin. I use magnesium for sleep enhancement. I wear my Oura. I'm obsessive about my sleep because I think a good night's sleep sets you up for success throughout your life. And it's a habit. It's a training exercise again to have a good and healthy sleep cycle. In that context, if you need to supplement, supplement. Okay, don't overdo it, but if you think that you can get your magnesium and occasional melatonin or whatever works for you in the nutraceutical space, fine. If you have a sleep disorder, talk to your physician. There's a lot more to be done if you cannot fight it yourself. Exercise. Don't think that 5 minutes is 5 minutes. A walk, a brisk walk is a brisk walk. And try to engage in these activities on a daily basis. Don't let a single day go without doing a little something. Okay. And in that sense, if you want to exercise and you want to give yourself a little boost, there is a way to, there are supplements, whatever works for you. Okay. You can use a little bit of creatine. You can use a little bit of, an amino acid supplement. You can use a little bit of, whey protein, high quality whey protein to, manage so the basis is there. You have to get off the chair and do something. Okay. And the same applies with stress control. Okay. There are many things that you can do that we discussed. Take a step back, create this intentional slowdown on a daily basis. All right. And what I tell people, I know that I cannot make people smile forcibly, but oh my God, smiling really works. Put a smile on your face, lose the grumpiness. That really helps. So sleep, physical activity, emotional regulation with stress control, and cognitive engagement, keep your brain working, because not everyone is a professional that works on brain concepts. There are a lot of other professions out there. If you don't exercise your brain on a constant daily basis because of X, Y, and Z, including your profession, work on your cognitive engagement. Read a book, do a crossword puzzle, play a game, a brain game. I'm not going to start preaching about social media and device engagement because everyone recognizes this is a completely different topic. But, save time and do things away from a screen. So in your sleep, don't take your phone in bed. Physical activity, don't be stuck on your phone while you're doing a power walk. Just enjoy and think about the power walk itself and absorb. Don't play a repetitive game instead of doing something cognitively engagement on your phone. And don't spend all your time on social media on Insta and on TikTok, because they by default will increase your anxiety levels.
I
So
think that's a big
that's
drug
it.
that people are addicted to for sure in its own way, right?
Well, you cannot imagine how many times I have to let go of my phone consciously. I'm in the same I mean, I'm always on my phone, but I put it down. Say like, no more, no more. I need to think. I need to smell the roses. I need to be out there.
So you pioneered some digital movement tracking for Parkinson's patients. And I'm curious if you think about sort of performance measurement is there an application of that type of approach in the workplace, and are there other like KPIs that you're particularly concerned with measuring in your work as a leader?
Well, you take me back many years. And I was intrigued and curious about the human brain forever. But when I was a young professor at the University of Miami, I actually spent a lot of time in the operating room while Parkinson's disease patients, were getting an operation called deep brain stimulation, where a neurosurgeon, together with a neurologist, in the case it was me, were advancing electrodes in these areas deep in the brain to help patients with their motor performance. And in order to ensure that the electrodes were placed in the right spot, we had to examine the patients as a neurosurgeon was advancing. And, for the first time I was intrigued, because how do you document the improvement? And you could actually use, way back then, that was like 15 years ago, we were using some very primitive two-way accelerometers and tapping devices. And we would see like an X improvement when the electrodes were installed. So that got me very interested in quantifying the motor behaviors and of course the psychological behaviors and cognitive performance in humans. Am I aware of any real-time tools for the workplace that use such systems? They're either tracking or I don't. We use a lot of these systems in clinical trials, and now the the whole field has evolved in a more naturalistic monitoring. So basically, it's through cameras that capture everything and image analysis. But people still use a number of wearables. Again, I think we're not there yet, in at least in my industry, to develop KPIs around. I mean, around artificial trackers. We still heavily depend on our own performance. Are we getting there? Absolutely. And I wouldn't be surprised if the next 5 years we transition to a completely different system of managing productivity.
I'm sure AI will play a role in that. And we could probably have a whole separate podcast on your takes on the intersection of AI and neurobiology and where we're going with that. But any big highlights that you can share and how you're thinking about AI as a neuroscientist yourself with the
Yeah,
future of
yeah.
medicine and
I mean, AI is everywhere. I'm a big consumer of AI. Myself, I'm an optimist, so I'm a true believer that AI will be a phenomenal tool for us humans to enhance our productivity and evolve as people and as a species. But there are inherent limitations. AI is not for everything. It's not the end all be all like it's being treated right now, and there's a certain element of danger, assuming that artificial intelligence is going to supplement or is going to substitute human intelligence. So there's a whole chapter in the book in Mind Odyssey, but you're absolutely right. This is an area where we're all observing, monitoring with daily changes in what's possible with AI, but we have to be very mindful because, like everything else, it's a tool. It's not a substitute. And that's where we need to focus. Unfortunately, not every company, not every country, not every person will have the same view. Regulation is everything. How do you regulate a tool to serve humanity rather than replacing it? That's how I view AI for now. But for the time being, it has been a wonderful tool in drug discovery, has been a wonderful tool in daily operations. It has definitely led to cost savings. I don't need an admin anymore, for instance, or an executive partner. You know, my time is a lot of time in my life is salvaged by AI for sure.
and we're all kind of our own Odysseus navigating this journey through AI as we figure out how to get to the Ithacas, and we'll see what that looks like. But if someone reads Mind Odyssey and remembers just one thing as we kind of wrap up, this has been such a great conversation, Spiros. But if someone were to read Mind Odyssey, what's one of the biggest takeaways that you would hope that they would get out of reading the book?
Yeah, professional life is very complicated, but it has a start and a finish. Enjoy the ride. That's all.
I love that. And so where can people find Mind Odyssey? And if folks wanted to follow the work that you're doing, connect, where should they go?
Available on all major online retail bookstores, Amazon, Barnes& and Nobles, etc. Again, launching a book, my goal was to be able to touch at least one or two people. I don't see myself as I never intended to write a number one selling nonfiction book, but
Amazing.
it happened. I'm grateful to the readers, and if you can get anything out of it, even the smallest piece of advice, you make me very happy every day. So I'm grateful to everyone that is picking up the book and the ones that are not. So it's been a great journey so far, and I'm working on the audiobook. It's still not available on an audiobook platform, but it's available on Kindle as well. Very accessible. Amazon, Barnes& and Nobles, your best bets.
Well, Spiros, thank you so much for taking the time for this conversation. So many great takeaways and insights that I feel like will really help folks that are in roles now navigating difficulties or stress, or if you're a leader and thinking about how to optimize your team and thinking through all things as we've talked about today with the neuroscience and approaches to building high performance teams, psychological safety, some really great stuff. So cannot thank you enough, Spiros, for joining me here today.
It was a real pleasure, Andrew. Thank you for your mindful questions and good luck with your series.
Thank you very much. Well, that was Dr. Spyros Papapetropoulos. Folks, you can pick up Mind, Odyssey, Training Your Brain for Purpose, Balance, Fulfillment at Every Career Crossroads, as he had mentioned. I'll drop a link in the video summary. You can find a chance to go pick up the book, go grab that, follow Spyros's work. If you like this episode of Talent Take 5, please do subscribe so you get all the future episodes, and so appreciate you listening in today. And again, I'm Andrew Sterling, and thanks for taking 5 with me. We'll see you next time.
I'm the one you should be giving your attention to, but instead